Our moderator is an associate professor in social anthropology at the sociology department of Bosphorus University. She completed her BA degree at Boğaziçi University and her PhD from University of California. Her interests include urban anthropology, political anthropology, material culture studies, space power gender, political ecology, and among her publications are Yeni İstanbul çalışmaları, sınırlar, mücadeleler, açılımlar, and kültür denen şey, antropolojik yaklaşımlar, both from Metis yayınları and co-edited with Cenk Özbay. She's also a member of board of Hrant Dink Foundation. I now would like to give the floor to our moderator, Ayfer Bartu Candan. You have the floor.
Thank you. Since the presentations will be in English, I thought it might be better to moderate it in English as well. It's really a pleasure and an honor to moderate this panel with very distinguished speakers. And this is actually also the last panel of the conference, titled Combating Discrimination and Hate Speech. And we have three scholars presenting their work. Ayşecan, Terzioğlu, and Berrin Yanıkoğlu will present together, and they will go first. And we have Zehra Arat presenting her work. So I will be introducing the panelists right before their presentations. And then at the end of the panel, we will have question and answer session, which Merve will also inform us about the technicalities of it as well. So the first presentation is by Ayşecan Terzioğlu and Berrin Yanıkoğlu, and the title of it is Istanbul Convention and Hate Speech on Twitter, Analyzing Anti-Istanbul Convention Tweets Through the Perspectives of Social and Computer Sciences. And Berrin Yanıkoğlu will start first. So let me say a couple of words about her. She received her BA degrees in computer engineering and mathematics at Boğaziçi University, and received her PhD from Dartmouth College. And she worked as a postdoc researcher at Rockefeller University and visiting professor at Xerox Imaging Systems and IBM Almaden Research Center. And currently she's a professor of computer sciences at Sabancı University. And she's also the founding director of Verim, Center of Excellence in Data Analytics at Sabancı University. And her main research interests include computer vision and machine learning, biometrics, document recognition, and image understanding. Well, let me also introduce Ayşecan at this point so that I don't interrupt their presentation. Ayşecan Terzioğlu, she got her PhD degree in cultural anthropology from the City University of New York, and she taught at Long Island University, Brooklyn College, and Fordham University. And in Turkey, she has been a faculty member at Koç University Faculty of Health Sciences and visiting faculty at Sociology Department of Galatasaray University. And currently, she's also at Sabancı University as an associate professor in cultural studies and gender studies programs. And her research interests include globalization and health inequalities, biopolitics, gender, anthropology of the body, and anthropology of the Middle East. So this is a very interesting collaboration between these two different fields. And please, the floor is yours.
Okay. So I'm going to be talking about deep learning-based hate speech detection in social media. This is a very exciting project for us because it's an interdisciplinary project among Faculty of Engineering and Natural Sciences and Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. You're going to hear part of the talk from Ayşecan Terzioğlu, who's here, and also with us collaborating is Reyhan Yeniterzi, who's an expert in natural language understanding, and Dr. İnanç Arın, who's an expert in machine learning and social media analysis. This is a project which is supported by TÜBİTAK Bilateral Collaboration Grant. In fact, the Tunisian team found us first. And so this will be a comparative work for both Turkish and English. Okay. So basically the project aim is to build a machine learning system to detect hate speech in social media, to flag it. It's very similar, in fact, to Facebook tweeting incorrect tweets, Twitter flagging incorrect tweets, or Facebook flagging similar material, or violence graphic videos, and so on. So we want to build such a system. So what do we need? What we need is first to understand the problem. So we came together, we started collecting some data, and we picked the Istanbul Convention for a focus group. Ayşecan will talk about it more. But then we started seeing what is hate speech. We started reading the literature and understanding it for ourselves. And initially we said, okay, a tweet can be can contain no hate speech, or it is actually a continuum of hate speech. So it starts from negative stereotyping, then it may contain a mild hate speech, or a medium hate speech, or an aggravated hate speech. With the help of Ayşecan Terzioğlu and her student Barış Bilkit, we try to narrow this down and pin this down, these definitions, and understand it among ourselves, the project group. But it turns out that when we started doing this, it's a very, very difficult task, even for humans. So what we want, remember, is we want to build a software system that will take this input and will say that this is hate speech or not, or assign a score of how much hate does a tweet contain. So what are the difficulties? So the difficulties is tweets are short. So people do abbreviations, they do spelling mistakes or shorthands. There's a Twitter jargon and format. So our traditional machine learning techniques will have to be adapted. There's also, in order to understand what is hate speech, sometimes we may need to understand what is being referred to, but more importantly, we need to know what is the context. You know, someone may say something and you have to understand, for instance, sarcasm. It's almost impossible to understand whether something is sarcasm or truly meant, okay? And we also found that there's a lot of wandering thoughts and grammar mistakes. So this becomes even harder to do. And last but not the least, we realized that upbringing makes a difference in how we sort of interpret hate speech. So Ayşecan Hoca here cannot stand a little swear word, whereas I'm a little more, thinking that maybe it's not hate speech. So it turns out that, we need to first overcome these difficulties, understand, and also decide on what can be done automatically. So this has to be in agreement. We can't aim something that we can't possibly implement. So what do other people do, other automated systems do? They either try to do binary hate speech or not, so binary classification, or categorical, like we initially started. So categorical meaning more than binary, very aggravated, very mild, and so on. And the more you have categories, the more it turns out it's difficult. But binary is also difficult because what if something is in the middle? How do you assign it to this side or to that side? So while doing this preliminary study, we are still at the very beginning of the project, we realized that maybe we want to assign a score. Score seemed easier. So it's easier to say this is a 2 out of 10 rather than saying that this is mild or medium and so on. So I think that we are going to take this route. And eventually we also acknowledge that this will be a semi-automatic solution like many natural language understanding tasks. Why? Because even in the world, similar systems systems will flag some certain tweets, and then humans actually look to see if there is indeed hate speech or violence or misinformation and so on. So that's what also we're gonna aim. And last two slides. So what is a machine learning system? I wanted to say in this forum. So we want to take a tweet and we want to develop this system so that it can output a score, and we want a low false negative rate. That is, if we want to really keep a safe environment, we don't want to miss any hate speech. So, and also we don't want, we want a low false positive rate. That is, we don't want to flag everything as hate speech if it's not. So we have to sort of balance this. This means the system needs to be calibrated so that it doesn't increase one mistake versus the other, okay? And machine learning systems, and in particular, maybe you have heard, deep learning is the current technology. Deep learning requires lots of data. And yesterday I heard that there are some other speakers who are collecting data. So I suggest we all share, because the machine learning system basically learns by looking at the data and seeing the patterns and how it works basically. So we have to give the data, say, this is hate speech, this is not, and the machine learns to approximate the same thing. Okay, so last slide. So basically, this is a natural language understanding task. It's in particular difficult for morphologically rich languages such as Turkish. The basic approach, which maybe we used before deep learning came up, is something like keyword spotting. So search for certain keywords within the text. But the current techniques are deep learning, which brought great strides in natural language understanding. But nonetheless, the problem remains quite difficult, and I'm just on time, I think. So the floor is for Ayşecan now.
So I'm going to talk about briefly about the methodology and the social science part of this research. And I want to go on why did we pick tweets about Istanbul Sözleşmesi? Why we wanted to focus on Istanbul Convention? As you all know, Turkey is the first country that approved and signed the convention in 2011, but it has legal and institutional problems in its implementation. And we all know that in the last few years, there is this rampant increase and visibility of violence against women in Turkey, as well as, of course, the LGBTI plus, but especially in summer 2020 and also spring 2020, COVID-19 is the pandemic, maybe another factor as well. But in summer 2020, we see the brutal murder of Pınar Gültekin in July. And right afterwards, we see an immense increase in the number of tweets for and against the implementation of Istanbul Convention. And, and also the, this tweets were about, the convention was about, as we all know, it aims at preventing and combating violence against women and LGBTI. So it was timely in that sense. So the tweets about, for the Istanbul Convention were pointing the severity of the situation, given the increase in numbers of violent cases and lack of adequate public or NGO resources where the survivors of violence can turn to. And the tweets about the tweets against Istanbul Convention, they had the imposition, they mentioned imposition of Western mentality, whatever it is, directed to harm the authentic Islamic lifestyle and traditional family life. These are in quotes because these are the tweets' words, basically. Okay, so let's try to, as Berrin mentioned, we categorize with all these difficulties about, about having this process of categorizing from negative stereotyping to mild stereotyping. as you see in these tweets, going from negative to aggravated. I'm not going to read, I translated them to English, but I'm not going to read all the tweets because I have a limited time. You see that in negative stereotyping, the words betrayal, those who defend it are either ignorant or dishonorable, or West servant, which comes around a lot. And a little bit aggravated, a little bit more insulting is it's the West game plan to immoralize the Turkish society, you can see. But also interesting thing is that the mostly feminists or the people for the Istanbul Conventions also included hate speech, like whoever opposes to it, to Istanbul Convention, are potential murderers. So both sides use hate speech, as we noticed. There is an aggravated example. It says, if a woman leaves her castle, leaves her house, that means it is perfectly natural that she will be subjected to violence. So it legitimizes, normalizes violence. So it sort of blames, it blames the women for it.
Ayşecan,
Okay.
son 5 dakika.
Okay, sure. I'm nearly done. I've had it. Okay, but as Berrin mentioned, this process of categorization was really difficult because we have to pay more attention to whether the form or the tone versus content, whether sometimes the tone can be pretty inflammatory, but the content is not that aggravated. It doesn't have direct threat to basic human rights or like sanctions like that, or such as life threats or threat of physical violence. It may have indirect threats, like you see this homophobic, transphobic a tweet about men like women or women like men, and they have this cruelty for being for the Istanbul Convention, and it sort of wants to mobilize guys, men, beyler, to be against the Istanbul Convention. So this was one of the controversial tweets, which we spent a lot of time, and we ended up saying that this is mild hate speech, but it was a controversy within the group as well. Finally, I want to mention why is this important, why we study in terms of social sciences, and as many speeches mentioned in the last 2 days, negative stereotyping and hate speech radicalized both positions, for or against Istanbul Convention, as the harsh tone and content of tweets rapidly escalate, even in the same tweet, as we can see, and they lead more and more polarization. So insults and threats breed more harsher insults and threats, and it becomes a vicious circle, which is impossible to get out. And the long-term, finally, as a conclusion, long-term consequences of this vicious circle and ongoing hate speech, escalating as hate speech, is the prevention of a proper dialogue on such an important issue as the violence against women and LGBTI+, and prevention of the motivation to learn what actually Istanbul Convention is and how it can be implemented by forming a quick and judgmental opinion. Are you for or against? Take your side, kind of thing. And last but not the least, very importantly, it prevents this whole vicious circle of hate speech. It prevents the discussion of macro structural causes of violence, such as the political, social, and legal gender inequalities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the timely presentation. It's also very interesting, I think, in terms of collaboration, and also, we have lots to talk about. Hopefully we'll do that in the question and answer session. Our next speaker is Zehra Arat. So let me just give you a very brief introduction about her. She's a professor of political science at the University of Connecticut and the founding president of the Human Rights section of American Political Science Association. She studies human rights with an emphasis on women's rights. She serves on the editorial boards of many prestigious international journals, such as Human Rights Quarterly, International Feminist Journal of Politics. And she's recognized in this field through many awards, including the American Political Science Association Award of Distinguished Scholar in Human Rights. And the title of her talk today is Tolerance, a Problematic Measure Against Discrimination. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me try to share my screen. Well, good evening. I guess I should say it's early morning here. Good evening to everybody from New York. I would like to first thank Hrant Dink Foundation and its fabulous staff who put together this really very interesting and important conference. And I'm delighted to be a part of it. And I thank them for not only including me, but also trying their best to accommodate my schedule by moving, or my time zone by moving things around. Well, different than the other papers, very good paper that my colleagues presented, mine is quite conceptual. And I problematize the concept of tolerance and its relationship to human rights. Among the things that I criticize, that at the individual level, tolerance is recognized as a virtue, and at the state level, that liberal state theory actually calls for neutral and tolerant state. And the human rights advocacy is increasingly leaning toward tolerance, or adapting tolerance as a human rights advocacy tool. UN General Assembly proclaimed 1995 as the UN year for tolerance, and in relation to that, UNESCO issued the Declaration of the Principles of Tolerance and recognized November 16 as the International Day of Tolerance. And I have some qualms with these from human rights perspective. And in that sense, although we all know human rights, let me briefly define them as the rights claimed against the state and society for the sole reason of being human. And the international human rights, in that sense, with its universalism, is based on the principle of equality in human dignity. And I find these various references about individual virtue and state tolerance as not compatible with the human rights concept of, or principle of, equality in dignity. And let me just, not this for some reason, okay. Well, let's visit first the meaning of tolerance, and can go back to the root verb of that, to tolerate. And here I would like to say in Turkish, since this conference is taking place in Turkish, sometimes tolerance is translated or treated as, used as hoşgörü. I would rather go to another usage, tolere etmek, which would allow us to understand my conceptualization or treatment of the verb. So to tolerate means permitting or enduring what is objectionable. So there is something that is objectionable. You would rather eliminate it, but you endure it and you allow it to exist. And the best example to illustrate this I can give is something we are all familiar with: tolerance for pain. Pain is objectionable. We want to get rid of it. We don't want to live with it, but we may allow it to linger for a while. And but if it keeps going on, then we take, and if it's not endurable anymore, then we take a pill, we may go through surgery and so on, but we try to get rid of pain. So in that sense, tolerance involves lack of action, intervention, but up to a point, because our ultimate goal in dealing with the objectionable is to eliminate the objectionable element. Now, well, when we talk about pain, it makes sense, but then we do have this concept of tolerance used toward people. And here I actually claim tolerance in that sense is not a virtue, because it actually first creates an objectionable other, that people we would like to eliminate, we don't want them to be around. And then we constrain ourselves from taking action toward that, acting on our fear or repulsion, disgust, and so on. And that is considered to be not taking action. Restraining yourself is considered to be a virtue. But if we carry this argument and follow the logic of defining tolerating the objectionable as a virtue, then we can say that the more objectionable categories of people one creates, then the more virtues that that person should be considered. If I hate not only the Blacks, but also the Jews and also the disabled, then I should be more virtuous than somebody who only objects to only one category of those people. So that's one problem with it. And the second problem I have with the with tolerance, that it actually is based on a system of hierarchy and suggests a asymmetrical hierarchical relationship. There is the tolerant person, and then there is the tolerated, and tolerant one is in the position of privilege, calls the shots, decides when to tolerate or not tolerate, but the tolerated has no other option but to basically accept. Now, I also have some qualms with tolerance as a state policy, and this is a liberal notion of the state. So the tolerant state is supposed to be a neutral and a passive state. Let people be and do whatever they want and coexist. And but within that sense, in its neutrality and passivity, the state allows engendering objectionable others. And also in neutrality, the state maintains the same distance to the tolerant and the tolerated. And this inevitably forces the vulnerable, the tolerated one, to hide or assimilate. And more importantly, since tolerance is a passive position, a position of non-action, it is also quite slippery, and it always, because there is the objectionable other, it can very easily move from tolerance to intolerance. So if I criticize tolerance as a problematic concept that I reject because it allows objectionable people to exist, but they're actually objectionable people should not exist and just allowed. Alternative to it, for more what I find more suitable for human rights is to not create objectionable people, but recognize that all humans have the right to exist. And this is the crux of my argument, this sketch, this illustration. And here in the middle, that we see two opposites. So the opposite of tolerance I take as acceptance. And tolerance is also considered to be a virtue or a good zone from which to operate in advocacy of human rights, because it is treated as a middle point between extermination, dealing with the other, and forced assimilation. And I would say that again, this is being an unstable state, that tolerance actually would lean toward one of the other. And then these two, actually, the rejection and extermination and forced assimilation, are not exactly opposites, but they reach the same goal, or intend to reach the same goal at their extremes through different paths. With the rejection, exclusion, segregation, separation, and ultimately extermination, we may be seeing massacres and genocides and ethnic cleansing. The population is eliminated, and or unobjectionable population is eliminated. But when we go for forced assimilation, then we do actually, if we successfully assimilate the objectionable population, then we erase the identity of that group. So that is eliminating the population. So extermination and erasure are ultimately the same. And to clarify this, like also the individuals and states move around on this graph. This is a prototype, and at different times may take different position. Tolerance lean toward rejection, or tolerance lean toward forced assimilation at different time points, and also
Zehra,
for different objectionable people. Thank you. I think I'm doing all right so far. Now, to give some examples, that is the, since we're in Turkey and I'm also in the United States, I'll throw in some examples from those countries. For example, to a great extent, we can say that the Ottoman and Turkish Republic's treatment of non-Muslim population can be defined as tolerance geared toward rejection. And at some extremes, in fact, we see the massacres and genocide. And on the other side, it is the for the policy toward Kurds and LGBTs, for example, has been for in the direction of assimilation. And so LGBT is referred to as sick, need to be treated, Kurds to be brought to their Turkish roots, and so on, Turkified. And the at the end, if the policy becomes successful, that is like they would be erased, no more Kurds, no more LGBTs, and so we may in fact call it white genocide. And now on the other side, on the acceptance is not by itself an ideal position. The only difference between them is that there is no objectionable people here. We actually recognize people as humans, but how do we recognize them as humans? As equal in dignity or as lesser human beings? So we recognize human beings, but as lesser than us, we follow the policy or the action of discrimination and subjugation of these lesser people. And here I would like to give the example of women, that all societies historically being patriarchal, in all societies we see women accepted as human beings, allowed to exist, but discriminated against and subjugated. And similarly, the slave economies based on racial, again, the systems that we can, as in the US, we can think about, again, the Blacks as recognized as humans, but lesser humans discriminated against and subjugated. We do recognize and accept them as lesser people because we need them. Therefore, productive and reproductive labor, they are critical for the society, so they're accepted. But if they are, their work is accommodated in some other ways, then we can see them moving to these other categories. And currently in the United States, for example, I can say that the Black population, especially young men, being seen as dangerous and not non-productive, we see more leading toward rejection and not extermination, but isolating them in mass incarceration. Now, what I would uphold as an acceptance that is conducive to human rights advocacy is accepting people as equal in dignity. They may be different from us, but they have the right to exist in equal terms. So non-discrimination and full recognition would be the approach. Now, these are examples. We can just go skip. And so if tolerance is not the advocacy tool, what are we supposed to do? And so promoting acceptance, that is like we should drop tolerance and teach acceptance and stress the equal worth and humanity of people. And the state should take side, and it should be intolerant toward creating objectionable people, and also define human rights violations as objectionable behavior and be intolerant of them. And the hate speech is, of course, critical in both of these. And also taking side with the tolerated, the vulnerable population, the state should take protective measures, not being neutral and in equal distance to everybody. Well, thank you very much for your time and patience.